I am Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susie.
And we're paranormal specialists who live in the most haunted city on earth, Savannah, Georgia. Every day is Halloween in our line of work, so join us as we spin true tales of haunts, murders, and disturbing Savannah history. I'm Madison.
I'm Chris.
And welcome to the most haunted city on earth. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Most Haunted City on Earth. My name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susie.
And we have Radar, or Michelle, back with us today. Y'all loved her so much, we had to bring her back for more. But today we're actually going to do something a little bit different. We're going to be doing a live react to two stories. First one, because it is Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to y'all who are listening to this. We wanted to do a story that we found on online about a Thanksgiving that turned into solving a 180-year-old murder. So we have not read this. That's just the title of the article. So we will be giving you our live reactions to this. And then after that, we are going to be reading a story that was sent in by one of our Parajunkies, and we're going to react to that as well. So let's go ahead and dive right on in. So this came from the New York Post. It was written by Chris Bradford from The Sun. And the article is entitled, How My Grandpa's Thanksgiving Ghost Story He Tells Each Year Led Us to Uncovering a 189-Year-Old Murder Mystery. That is quite an intro. So
it's quite a Thanksgiving, puts a whole new spin on like the family drama at Thanksgiving.
Right. Yeah. Well, so my thought is like, that's a cool grandpa who's like, all
telling
right,
ghost stories every Thanksgiving.
Yes. Gather around the turkey, y'all, and let's talk about the ghosts. But Grandpa's haunting Thanksgiving story appeared to help two brothers uncover a near 200-year-old murder mystery. Bill and Frank Watson were told a chilling tale about 57 Irish immigrants who died at a railroad site in Pennsylvania during the cholera epidemic in 1832. The area is known as Duff's Cut, as the rail workers' boss was named Philip Duffy. It is a stretch of tracks located around 30 miles from Philadelphia. The brothers were told the chilling tale by their grandpa, a railroad worker, every Thanksgiving. They believe the rail workers died violently and not from cholera. Frank told CNN in 2010, this is a murder mystery from 178 years ago. They really are jumping around a lot with this. They're like, it's 200 years. It's 189 years. But yes, from 178 years ago, and it's finally coming to the light of day. According to local legend, a man walking home from a tavern claimed to see mysterious green figures dancing in the mist in September. Oops, sorry, my phone jumped. In September 1909. That sounds like a game of D&D. Like, they're like, and now the mist turned into green figures. What are you going to do? Roll for intelligence. But
he was obviously coming home from a tavern, so
yeah, exactly.
Spirits were involved.
Absolutely. It's just not the same type of spirits, for sure. But the documents quote the unnamed man as saying, I saw with my own eyes the ghosts of the Irish men who died with cholera a month ago. Dancing around the big trench where they were buried. It's true, mister. It was awful. Frank inherited the railroad papers from his grandpa and said one of the documents said X marks the spot. That's very cliche. But they suspected that the files contained clues to the location of a mass grave. Bill and Frank delved deeper into the case. They started digging in 2002 and years later found forks and tobacco pipe shards. The brothers didn't believe struggling laborers would discard valuable items. Researching in March 2009, they found a bone, raising suspicions that cholera may not have killed the rail workers. Teams also uncovered a skull that had been pierced by a bullet and cleaved by a hatchet, Reuters reported. Bill, a historian, said, we have no idea what percentage of these guys were murdered, but if we have 57, it's the worst mass murder in Pennsylvania history. He said the average age of workers was around 22 years old. Forensic anthropologist Janet Monge said the case provided vital clues about the lives of Irish immigrants. She said it was a cruel and rugged existence that categorizes the immigrant experience and speaks very broadly of xenophobia that existed at the time. Monge discovered bones from at least 7 skeletons, including 4 skulls. She said one skull has a little divot on what would have been the side bone of the skull. That little divot is something that didn't happen when they excavated it out of the ground. The anthropologist speculated that one of the laborers may have been clunked on their head before they died. Researchers believe more bodies are underneath the surface. Bill Watson says the coffins have been shut with more than 100 nails per coffin, according to Hidden City. The remains of 5 men and 1 woman from those who died at Duffy's Cut were laid to rest at a cemetery or in a ceremony in Pennsylvania in 2012. The body of teenager John Ruddy, who was the county Donegal, was repatriated to Ireland to Ireland, and a burial took place in County Tyrone. For Catherine Burns in October 2015. Forensics believe that injuries to her skull indicated that she had been murdered in the BBC report. Duffy's Cut later became part of the Pennsylvania Railroad's main line. And that is what we've got.
Crazy.
First off, I want to know where this is at so we could go investigate this
Right?
place.
I'm sure we could probably, if we did a
Outside
little
of
bit.
Philadelphia.
Yeah. It's, but the exact location, I'm sure somewhere on Reddit, somebody's got some information on
Especially
that.
if they've been digging and
Exactly.
there's got to be a direct place.
My second question is, and I know I'm going to sound stupid not knowing what cholera is exactly, but is it something deadly like,
Oh yes.
You're going to die, or there's a chance you're going to live?
No,
It's
especially in
very
the
hard.
1800s,
Yeah.
I would say that cholera
said-
was a death sentence for the most part.
It happened in 1909, right?
Mm-hmm.
No, the witness was
Oh,
1909.
yes. That's
And
who
what
saw
he
the
said
ghost.
was-
Yeah.
And it was
that's
very
who saw the
misleading.
ghost.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
It was very misleading because I thought that too, because he said, I saw those people who died a month ago, making me think that the people died a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
But no, it was a month since he saw it.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I had to put it together because we were told that it was in 1800s.
Something. Yeah. Yeah.
At 173 years, that puts it in the mid 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, the ghost story that they were citing was from 1909.
So they saw the ghost in 1909.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I wonder what year. It didn't say what year it actually.
It probably did. Let's see. So
Was 178 years from 1909? No, because
No.
it was
It was
100
from
and
2012,
So
I
let's
think.
go back.
Yeah.
So let's go back 178 years. What would that have been?
yeah. So it was 170 something years from in 2010 that it was 178 years prior. So they're like, do the math.
1832.
Okay, so there you go.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
I'm a very visual person, so
Sure.
I needed to see that. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. The so cholera basically it was like a disease you got through the water a lot of times, and so it was if you got it, you usually didn't recover from it. It killed a lot. It killed a lot of people on the Oregon Trail. It killed a lot of people in various like kind of areas like that. So it would have been very odd that 57 people died of that disease in one place.
Is it contagious?
I think you have to. I don't think it's airborne at all. So
No, but
yeah,
not knowing cause at the time probably did suggest that they could have created a quarantine area. So it's possible that they quarantined these people for fear of contagion or for fear of spread. That might explain, the sheer number and placement of them
Because
being all together.
That's the first feelings that came into my head was that somebody was scared and went in there and killed them all.
That's very possible too.
In a
because even if
quarantine
you
area.
quarantine them and then
yeah.
somebody went in and just took them out, that's very possible. But it's also possible, being Irish immigrants, and especially in that period, Irish immigrants were not treated well often, and often were given areas to live in that weren't necessarily ideal. It could be a marauding group of people just against the Irish immigrants running in to murder, an encampment.
Or they didn't want to pay them.
That is true as well. Yeah, you never really know, especially because they don't even know what the true cause of it was. But I do find it odd that they found people with bludgeoned heads and bullet holes.
Things like that.
See, and that's why I was saying that was my first thought as you were reading it, is that somebody was scared and went in and
just whacked them all.
That's the feeling that I got. Yeah, the energy that I got.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you'd have to go there in person and kind of feel out the vibe, because usually there's a different energy. And what I've been able to tell is that there's a different energy from sick people dying in a place versus people who were murdered.
Oh, absolutely. Sure.
So it's definitely an interesting story.
And it does sound mob mentality when you come to the idea of a large number of people. You need a larger number of people to kill them.
Exactly.
Yeah, but they were all killed in different ways. Some were shot in the head, some were bludgeoned to death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, again, leading to the idea of a group of people just
coming in and
swinging, weapons and bludgeoning and shooting.
Exactly. I mean, it could have been that what they were kind of saying is it's a sign of xenophobia in the time period. It could have been a group that were we don't want these Irish people in here. So yeah, whack, 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 bang, bang, things like that. So, I mean, it is pretty up in the air, but it definitely feels like it was a purposeful mass grave. They're we're just going to throw them all into this ditch.
Absolutely.
But what I thought was weird was the ghost story, or the ghost encounter portion of it, where they were dancing. They were dancing, yeah. And I was they're dancing at their gravesite? That's a new one.
Which could have been a more indication that it was the xenophobic attack, where they were living a life, having a life, celebrating life, and then somebody comes rolling in and just massacres them.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it feels like to me, if they're dancing at where they're buried, because that's not, if you're murdered, you're not going to dance at your gravesite, no matter how joyful of a person you were, so.
Well, what better way to get attention than doing an Irish jig, right?
Right? Yeah.
And that's another thing, was because of the way the narrative unfolds, I was always thinking that it was railway, that it wasn't, but obviously this was just a plot of land in which the railway would ultimately go through, Duff's Cut, whatever it was, which suggests that you could be dealing with a settlement, a group of people who are, granted land, and think of the celebratory life that you would have coming from an impoverished area or coming from a hardship area, and now you've got a new home, you've got a new place, you've got a new life, and then there are these very aggressive xenophobic people who may have come without warning, who may have just come in the dead of night and just done this. And again, this is a lot of trying to put the puzzle pieces together, because a good ghost story is oftentimes a puzzle. It's oftentimes what is that mystery? What is the missing element? Because a lot of times people have encounters, they see something and they experience something, and you're like, what about the experience that they had would echo, on, and the idea of seeing green figures dancing,
like the Haunted Mansion.
Right. And having that concept of what would be celebratory for that time, what would be, and why green? That's another
right. I
question.
thought that too. I want to know if somebody else has experienced the same thing or has had other experiences near where the mass grave was since 1909.
Oh, sure.
Well,
it's obviously an enduring enough story for this grandfather to tell it, right? Every Thanksgiving, gather around, children, I'm going to tell you this tale.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
Maybe the green represents the disease.
Could be very possible.
Could also represent Ireland.
That is also very possible.
Wearing their colors.
Yeah.
or the greed, if they were killed for money.
It's just odd because usually you don't see spirits as green or colors in general. Pretty much every spirit I've seen, they're pretty true to either being a shadowy figure or they're wearing the clothes that they identified with. And it's usually their favorite outfit, or it's the outfit they were buried in, or it's, something they wore every week, like their favorite shirt or whatever. That's tends to be. I'm not kidding.
Or maybe he was a little too drunk and saw them, but they were green because he was a little drunk and about to throw up.
Honestly, that is very possible as well.
Although you do hear about strangely colored mists and strangely colored orbs, and a lot of times when people have paranormal experiences, they can tend to slip into color, and I oftentimes wonder if it's not the color that they're seeing, but an impression that they're getting that they relate to a color. Because a lot of people are influenced by color and sensation. And so if they see something strange and they think sickly green or the pale green light, it's like, was it green, or was that the feeling you had upon seeing it? Were you dealing like with an aura? Are you seeing the aura of a situation, or are you now being influenced by your own synesthesia? Your own misinterpretation of sensation and translating it to some visual component.
Well, that was my first thought when you said cholera and they were sick, and then you said they saw the color green. I thought the cholera. Sure. That's why they were seeing that.
And there's a reason why they suggest that it was a cholera, grave, because apparently that was known to the community at large, that there was a mass grave, a cholera grave, and intriguingly that they would also note that the coffins had like 100 nails in it.
Yeah, they were like, stay in there.
Right. It's like, was that because they were diseased bodies, or was it because there was evidence of wrongdoing and they didn't want someone to pry open these boxes and see bullet holes and bludgeoning marks and things like that?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it definitely does ring some suspicion alarms, because if you think about it, in the type of people that they were, they probably weren't really caring that much about how nice your grave was, or or making sure that your coffin's going to stay shut, or things like that. They're kind of just like, put them in the box and just throw them in the hole,
Especially with sick. When the sick were dead, it was not a highly scientific time. If a body was diseased and it died, the chances of person handling a diseased body without just shoving it in a hole and pouring lime on it, it doesn't seem as likely that they would go through that much trouble over diseased dead. They would just try to get them, out of circulation, as it were.
I mean, that's the whole reason why we had the body men in Savannah, was like, okay, you can go and handle that one. We're not going to deal with that. So
yeah, but if it was more friends and family that were Irish that buried them, maybe the 100 signifies something.
Well, that is
because I don't think the people that killed him would have been like, oh, let's bury them and seal them in these 100 nail coffins.
That's a very good point.
It would have been their family.
That's a very good point. Unless their family also died, because that's the other question. Because it was 57 people,
women and children included.
Would it have been like a family gathering that like at the event?
That could have been a feud.
Ooh.
A familial feud.
We're really just theorizing here.
Spitballing, and good storytelling involves, oohs and ahs. So.
Yeah, we're really just guessing what could be happening, because unfortunately, it did leave a lot of plot holes. And like, well, was it this? Did we ever find out if it was this, and this? Definitively. So. Maybe one day we'll revisit. Maybe next Thanksgiving we'll see if there's any follow-ups.
I feel like I'm probably within the next 24 hours I will do a little bit of a deep dive, just because it's fascinating enough. Especially that it's spurred on from a ghost story. Somebody thought enough to tell this story over and over again about a drunken man encountering something on the way home, and then the people who heard the story was like, well,
hold up.
Yeah, it's the ghost heroine phenomenon. You hear something, you're moved by it, you immediately want more. You immediately want to catch whatever it was that struck your interest in the first place.
And the fact that they believed it, a drunk man to begin with, is very telling. But
I just looked it up, and 100 nails in a coffin doesn't mean anything, so there's that.
Your brain needs support, and new Ollie Brainy Chews are a delightful way to take care of your cognitive health. Made with scientifically backed ingredients like Thai ginger, L-theanine, and caffeine, Brainy Chews support healthy brain function and help you find your focus, stay chill, or get energized. Be kind to your mind and get these nootropic chews at ollie.com. That's OLLY.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Okay.
Well, and there's a lot of magic that involves coffin nails, though. But my belief is that they were hiding evidence or trying to seal away illness. But hiding evidence sounds pretty plausible.
It sounds on par. Yeah.
Which again, because mass graves are oftentimes the mandate of a city, that gives you maybe these were official people who caused this crime, who did the crime. Maybe this was a land grab. Maybe it was, because when you sanction a mass grave, it is not a group of people who are like, let's do this. It's like, get this done, get these bodies out of here, in my experience, most mass graves do not involve coffins.
Yeah, they usually bind the bodies.
Right, they bind the bodies, wrap the bodies. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Make them as small as possible so you can make more room.
Right.
But it is interesting that they gave them their own coffins, maybe to save face and be like, oh, like, we didn't kill those people.
It also seemed like they weren't all. Mm-hmm. They weren't all buried in coffins. And again, just on first blush, it did seem like there were loose bones, loose things that they found, and then the coffins themselves were another story as they excavated.
Well,
I'm gonna research more when I get home.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, it's an interesting story.
Yeah, and that's not to say though they could have stacked the coffins and the ones on the bottom went like crushed.
That's true.
And,
it's not like wood is
super,
permanent.
Yeah, super sturdy.
You put it in wet and muddy ground, it could easily
Or they
rot.
started and said, this is taking too long.
That's true. It's like tank 100. Are you sure we want to do this with everyone? And it's like maybe the bodies in the coffins with 100 nails are the most condemning. The ones that seem to be the most. The most likely to come back and be like, hey.
Yes.
Or it was like, oh, the boss is gone.
Right. Yeah. You should have worn your Sherlock Holmes hat for this episode. Yeah. Like, I wonder why.
I wonder what's happening here. No, I love a good mystery, and I love how stories start from simple threads of this happened, but why? This occurred, but what was the cause and that these people would investigate to this level is remarkable, because apparently it's just two guys whose grandfather would sit around on Thanksgiving. Again, this is a Thanksgiving show. Happy Thanksgiving. Yeah. But on Thanksgiving, they'd sit around and hear ghost stories, this ghost story, and be like, that ghost story is a ringer. I'm gonna go out and find out what happened.
I'm gonna really shake their jelly with this one.
Yeah, but now it has me going, okay, we need to plan a trip.
Right? Yeah. And if you're listening and you have kids, maybe sit them down around the turkey, or if you're vegan, your tofurkey or whatever. But maybe just sit them down and tell them this story and be like, did you know there's a mass grave?
Regale them with the ghost stories.
Honestly, I would do that. I would totally do that.
It used to be a very big part of celebration. People think that Halloween was the hallmark of spooky story time, but Christmas was very well known to tell ghost stories. Any holiday was a good excuse to sit around and tell ghost stories. Ghost stories were prevalent throughout history.
It's true. We just talked about that in our Parajunkie exclusive episode. We did like a little mini Christmas episode about the Grilla, which is a
Icelandic
monster.
Christmas monster.
With so if you want to hear more about a horrific dragon creature that eats kids,
woman, highly accepted neighbor though. That's another thing is it was a monster that just lived in the neighborhood, and people were like, yeah, that's the gorilla.
Yeah, she eats kids sometimes. She's got some balloons with kids in them.
Balloons with kids in them?
What is this, it?
I know, right?
It was so peculiar.
Pennywise is living over there.
Exactly. And so if you want to hear that story, you need to become a Parajunkie because we had a grand old time talking about the drama, the saga that was the gorilla.
It was a full-on soap opera.
Yeah.
Full of betrayals and failed marriages and murder and mayhem.
Yes. But the point being is that a lot of it came down to the story was told to kids to keep them inside during the winter to the point where, the government had to step in
That's right.
and be like, no.
Stop telling that story. We need the kids to go out.
Yeah, because kids weren't going outside. The government
would not leave their houses.
The
I
government,
have to see that.
Oh yeah, the government put a rule out saying that you can't use this as an intimidation tactic anymore. So clearly, it's a very common thing, especially when you're stuck indoors. I'm sure those of you who are in our colder states will know and agree to that when you're stuck inside during the winter, you got to entertain yourself somehow. Right. So, might as well.
Ghost stories were the Netflix of the ages.
Absolutely. And it varies depending on your area. So maybe comment down below if you're watching on YouTube, or message us and tell us your ghost story that your family told you during the winter time or things like that. I'd love to hear it.
I'd love to hear the ghost stories that families tell. Like, what scarring story did your parents tell you when you were a child?
Mine was the story about it's the classic hitchhiker ghost story of the girl who died on prom night in Greensboro, and when she got into the car, she would tell you to take her to this house, and then they get to the house, she's not in there, and so they go up to the door and they knock on the door, and the lady answers, and she's like, "Oh, you picked her up, didn't you?" And that was what my step grandmother always told me. That was her go-to story.
So my dad, I don't know how diabolical he was, but one of the stories that he would tell me was that toys come to life at midnight. So you had to be asleep by midnight.
Demented toy story.
Because if the toys see you awake after midnight, they'll kill you.
Okay.
And it was also treat your toys nicely. Don't break your toys. Also fit into that. And so my dad was like, you have to be asleep by midnight. Because if the toys see you up and about, they will, they're not allowed to be seen moving, so they will attack you. I don't know what time it is. I was a little kid, so I wasn't able to tell time. So it's just the dark, and I'm like, oh no. One night, I'm guessing I was 8 years old, and my dad had been feeding me this for a long time. My dad turned on a fire engine, and it was just going in circles in my room, and I freaked out because I was sure that the toys knew I was awake and this fire engine was going off. Also, my dad told me that the monsters under the bed wouldn't get me. It was the monsters outside the window that I should worry about. And so every night I just stare at the window, and over time I convinced myself that I could see things moving outside the window. Because, you're a little kid, you're scared of the monster outside your window because your dad told you it exists. And sure enough, I'm like looking out the window and I'm thinking I'm seeing little lumps and stuff. And we were like on the 4th floor of a building. So seeing anything outside your window, very bizarre.
Radar, did you have any stories that your family would torment you with?
Torture you
really?
with?
No.
That's so disappointing.
My family's kind of tame other than me. I'm the non-tame one.
That's fair. My dad was not tame. I was telling Chris this before we started the episode. I was like, because we were talking about, we were like, there's really not that many like ghost stories associated with Thanksgiving. It's kind of, like the holiday that's forgotten usually. But I told him, I was like, yeah, unless there's headless turkeys running around. And he was like, oh yeah, headless turkeys. I was like, wait, you don't understand that. So basically it's a running joke in my family because my dad was stay-at-home dad, so he would take my sister and I to school every day. And when it was particularly foggy on mornings, depending on the time of year, there was a rotating list of headless creatures that could get you. So, you've got the, obviously it really starts with the Headless Horseman in Halloween time. And then it gets progressively more odd because then you go to Thanksgiving where it's the headless turkey. So my dad would be like, yeah, if you listen closely, you can hear it gobbling in the distance, looking for its head. And so I'd be sitting in the chair or in the seat next to him in the car, and he would just go, gobble, gobble. And I'm like, he's like, oh, do you hear that? And I'm like, what? And he'll be like, gobble, gobble, gobble. And then slowly it would get progressively louder, and to the point where it's like the turkey attack where, it's obviously tickling and like laughing and things like that. But yeah, it would become headless turkey, headless reindeer. We had the headless leprechaun. That was always a classic for St. Patrick's Day. Headless Cupid, all of the above. So, that's when I think of Thanksgiving monsters, I think of headless turkey. And please feel free to use that for your children. It was quite a bonding experience, to be like...
And the story of the headless turkey Thanksgiving brought up Juliette Gordon-Lowe,
yes,
the founder of the Girl Scouts. One of my favorite stories of Juliette Gordon-Lowe was she was an advocate for animals. She was very upset with the violent nature in which we kill turkeys, and convinced her family that they should chloroform the turkey instead of chop its head off, because it was a more peaceful way to go. So she convinces the family that this is because she doesn't want the animal to suffer. So they chloroform the turkey and they pluck it to get ready for cook, and they put it in the refrigerator. The next morning, the cook opens the refrigerator and this naked turkey jumps out of the refrigerator and just runs around the house, and of course from that Thanksgiving forward, they would decapitate the turkey in proper fashion. But
could you imagine how horrifying a bald turkey? That is so. I'm sure that turkey was so frightened. Like that's like the worst drug trip gone bad.
I'm sure it woke up thinking, "What the heck did they do to me?"
Literally, no, it's like, oh my god, what happened to me last night?
I'm naked by aliens.
Right. Exactly.
Oh no.
And I'm cold, and
Where are my feathers?
I'm in a refrigerator. Or what would
an icebox?
Yeah,
it was
exactly.
An icebox,
I was going to say they wouldn't have had a refrigerator, but and imagine trying to catch that turkey too. That would have.
And that's the way the story goes is that it was an event chasing the turkey around the kitchen. I
would have loved to be there. I would love to be a fly on that turkey's wall.
Was that the very first episode of Naked and Afraid?
Right. But yes, so those are our takes on Thanksgiving monsters and stories. Definitely not scary unless you imagine a plucked turkey running around. That's pretty frightening.
That would be frightening in experience, but in storytelling, it's pretty funny.
I think that's hilarious because there's a whole bunch of funny stories about Juliette Gordon-Lowe and her family, so that just adds to her.
Yeah. She was just a great. That whole family was just a family of characters.
Yes.
Yeah, and we can get into that in a whole different episode.
We'll do a Juliette Gordon-Lowe episode, I'm sure.
My favorite story of her is Sherman and looking for his
you look
horns.
for the horns.
Yes.
Yeah, old devil Sherman.
I love it. That's so funny. We just talked about that in a episode, few episodes ago, pretty recently.
Somebody was asking for Juliette Gordon-Lowe ghost stories, and that's one of my favorite Juliette Gordon-Lowe stories is the Sherman showing up at her house.
I love it.
Well, now ghost stories, her parents.
Yes,
him
Willie
coming back for
Nellie,
yeah. We told that story too. That's mine as well.
It's just romantic.
It is. I love Willie and Nellie. They're so cute. But
I don't consider it a ghost story though. It's ghostly love.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So.
It is. Well, speaking of ghostly stories, let's go ahead and move on to Angela Linneman's story that she sent us. She is a Parajunkie, so she messaged us this story. We have not read it, so we are going to live react to it again. But yes. So let's go on and read this. All right. I'll just read you this original thread. So it says, "Thank you. Love the show. And after spending my childhood in a haunted house in Murfreesboro, which is outside of Nashville, Tennessee, it's nice to hear a show that explores the deep hauntedness of the South." And so we asked her, "You lived in a haunted house?" Of course, we had to inquire about that. We'd love to hear some stories. And so she said, "I did. It was a house my parents built in the mid-'80s in a really beautiful new neighborhood that was constructed on the site of one of the bloodiest battles in the Civil War, the Battle of Stones River. At the official Stones River National Battlefield, people have reported seeing soldiers, but our house just across the river from the battlefield was some sort of hub. My parents' bedroom would fill up every night with what my mom called the Grand Central at rush hour." of ghosts. I can just picture that in my head. Yeah, Grand Central Station, if you've ever been there, it is very anxiety inducing. So as ghosts, I can picture that. But swirling, wispy, white, translucent figures filling the room, moving around quickly. I only saw them once. I was sleeping in my parents' bedroom because I was sick, and we had moved there after the young kids sleep with their parents era. So it was the only time I'd done it. I woke up in the middle of the night and saw them all around the room, and a rational kid that I was, I believed I was having a fever dream or hallucination. I didn't know that those are uncommon with a 99-degree fever. My parents let me believe that was the explanation. Oddly, while I saw the figures and my mother would see them every night, my dad and brother didn't see the apparitions in that bedroom. My brother did see a ghost in his own room one night and ran into my parents' room to wake them up, telling them that there's a man at the foot of his bed. He doesn't remember it, but my parents certainly do. I always slept with my door open and the hall light on and never, ever looked out the window at night. I think that the spirits knew how scared I was of seeing them, so it didn't appear to me other than the one time that I wandered into the Ghost Grand Central. I theorized that our house was on the site of a field hospital or another hub of activity that would also have been the site of many deaths. I still never ever felt that creeping, skin-crawling feeling in that house. That feeling that accompanies so many haunted places. It's still the most beautiful place I've ever lived, and that time was the happiest of my life. Later on, when I lived in LA as an adult, now that was a haunted city. All of the stereotypes are true. The tragedy of failed dreams, the falling into drugs and despair. I felt that feeling countless times there. Like the terrible angst is one part of a stairwell in a building in old Hollywood, where I confirmed someone had been stabbed to death. Or the hallways of my last building, a faded Art Deco palace, hallways which everyone ran/walked through to be out of them quickly. Or the basement of the same place where I would do my laundry while blasting my headphones and not looking around too much, where they had a speakeasy during Prohibition. And then there were the things I did experience with the usual senses, which ironically were not very scary at all, very banal. Just a shadow figure passing through a doorway in my apartment, never felt or seen again, or the knocking on the bedroom door of my friend's apartment from his interior hallway when nobody else was there. He also saw a shadow figure lying on the bed next to him. Ew. An elderly lady sitting at his desk. That whole building made everyone who went there feel incredibly creepy and bad. LA is a weird place and needs its own ghost show. Definitely. LA is, I mean, it's of course it's going to have, like a bunch of spirits, because you're right. It is a place of a lot of despair, a lot of people dying through drug use, suicides, murders, fires, all sorts of things.
High volume.
Yeah.
More people, more ghosts.
Exactly. It's true. That you've gone through a lot. Yeah.
That's incredible. That's very interesting too, is the construct of your house being across the river from the battlefield, and a notion of it being a hospital makes a lot of sense. But more than that, a staging area, prior to the battle, going into the battle, coming back from the battle. But honestly, there's so much that could be going on, and the wispy nature, that description
so fascinating
of the wispy nature is one that I've actually heard in different occasions, and it was not necessarily the spirits of an event as much as it was the condition of the environment. Mm-hmm. What you're really seeing is a coalescence of energy. When they're not showing up in those physical forms of people, but the will-o-wisp kind of notion, it is suggesting that the land itself has high properties of paranormal ability, like a energy source. We had talked about before, like lime deposits or quartz deposits under the ground, ley lines, magnetic fields, fault lines, things of that nature. oftentimes can be conducive, but to have that concentration of ghosts in that finite space on top of that, just that one bedroom, really does raise a lot of questions. Like, was it on the second floor? Was it, was it a ground floor bedroom? Was it a second floor bedroom? Where was it in relation to the, geography of the river? Because rivers too are great sources of paranormal activity, because there is a motion of energy going through a river. Rivers are very oftentimes, the banks of rivers are haunted, and probably too because people tend to live right on the rivers. Mm-hmm. So that's whole lives and whole communities and whole existences. So I'm endlessly fascinated by your 1980s beautiful home.
Yeah.
Makes me want to investigate that more too, because it makes you wonder, was there a house built there during the Civil War, or did they have that makeshift field hospital?
Sure.
Yeah.
Because even if it was just on the land, it could still haunt the property that's there if it's sitting directly on top of where all those people died. So,
and also worth noting that if you and your mother are extremely sensitive, the spirits would be drawn to a house where they could be experienced. So, on top of being in a haunted area, the idea that spirits are drawn to those who can witness them and can give credence to their existence, it's possible that your mom is very much a drawing force, because if she was seeing them every single night, they are presenting themselves to her every single night. That gives you some idea of that the haunting may not be necessarily the volume of death and mayhem that happened in the location as much as it is the lightning rod that your perception might be.
So what I got from it immediately is because it seems like it's the same thing every single night. That feels like a residual haunting to me. Nothing intelligent. And I mean, there might be some intelligent hauntings, including the man who stood at your brother's bed or whatever, Oh
yeah. The shadow figure at the end of the bed is a different type of
entity.
Yeah.
I don't think that's even associated with what was going on in the bedroom. But, it's really common for abilities to be passed down generationally, especially with women.
Through the females. Absolutely.
It's that way in my family for sure. My mom will swear she doesn't have any kind of abilities, but she literally would tell me when I was a kid, she's like, every time I have a dream of death, 3 people die. I was like, well, that sounds like you have some type of ability.
It sounds like an ability.
Claircognizance.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's what that would be.
Yeah, which is funny because Radar and my mom both share the same birthday, and they also both share that ability to see dreams that kind of come true at times. So I thought that was interesting that they have that kind of connection.
I do have that happen all the time too, where I will know who's going to be dying next.
Yeah.
I get those feelings like she does. So that is weird.
It must be a Virgo thing. Those September 9th Virgos really, they have that ability, but it's true. It's, it's very common on the, with women to all have a certain sense, or for some reason, this ability to sometimes just peer into a moment. And that's what it sounds like your mom is experiencing, is like almost seeing like, I hate to reference the Haunted Mansion again, but I'm a nerd. But when you're on the Haunted Mansion ride and you go over the dining or the ballroom, where they have the projections of all the people dancing, all the ghosts dancing, that's what I pictured when you were talking about it. And that sounds kind of like, when you're just seeing that moment happening, it's kind of like watching a movie or sorts.
It's funny because I had a movie pop into my head, which was Poltergeist.
Oh.
The scene where all the grave, they showed up as balls of light.
Oh yeah.
And so they saw them as balls of light, but when they went back to look, they saw that the balls of light were at the center of like figures, like actual human shapes, which does kind of, because the very notion of saying Grand Central Station elicits this idea of movement, of crowded, of things coming and going, which could indicate portal, could indicate that you are actually at a nexus point where spirits are traversing back and forth, spirit realm to our realm, and the ability to see that the fact that it's happening right there suggests that maybe it is literally like Grand Central Station. Spirits, uploading and downloading from whatever plane that they are traveling from back and forth. There is a notion that you can find these places in nature, that there's these places where the veil is very thin and where the idea that a spirit could conceivably cross into our path, making them more accessible to us than anywhere else. Because a lot of people also believe that those nexus points, those portals, are energy sources, and the further away from the portal they get, the less energy they have to draw from, and they have to resort to haunting. Then they have to resort to actually trying to get attention and trying to get energy. But there are some places that are just naturally, a good recharge station for spirits.
That's a really interesting point.
Well, the first thing I thought of when you were reading this story, as soon as you said battleground, I'm thinking Gettysburg. All these battlegrounds I've been to, they're very, very high energy as far as like the feelings that I get when I go there. And maybe they're reliving the battle every single night, and that's why she's seeing them every single night, because they're coming in, bringing in the wounded, and, maybe that's what she's seeing. Maybe they're just reliving it every single night.
I mean, that I feel like you're on the right track with that, especially because, like when you think about a hospital in general, like an ER or like
it's chaotic.
It's super chaotic, and so why it would be the same thing, even in the Civil War. Every time you watch like a film with like a period piece, depiction of a field like hospital.
Yeah, right.
It's that exact chaos, way. Right? It's chaos. It's just people like running with rags and like trying to like saw people's legs off. I'm like, that's just a lot going on.
Well, and just the battle themselves are very hectic, and there's just everybody's running everywhere, and there's bombs going off, and you see horses running, and it just is. It's all very chaotic. And then add that in, people are getting hurt, and they're trying to amputate things, and they don't have the medicine that we have, and she said it was one of the bloodiest battles in Tennessee history.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if
the entire Civil War.
Oh, the entire Civil War.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was up there. Stony Creek.
Yes, Stony Creek.
I'll have to research that one. But we all hear of Gettysburg. I have not heard of that one, so I'm gonna have to research that one. But
Gettysburg was such a focal battle too. Because a lot of battles did not sway or change the tide of the war. We tend to pay attention to the ones that were strategic and key. And having visited Gettysburg, there's a strange amount of tranquility for being a battlefield. On top of that, like the sensations, and I had a friend who was working with infrared cameras, and he was taking pictures, and the picture that he thinks had the most ghostly activity, what it looked like was people picnicking. And it was like, that is so bizarre. Why do you think that? Why is this happening at the site? We're looking for soldiers, and they're like out in the woods. You can see like soldiers marching, and it's this. And he's like, it looks like a woman in a dress sitting with either a child or another woman sitting right there. And as we tried to research it, it turned out that there were picnics around the battlefield. And I was like, I've never heard that. Is that, and it's like, well, you got to understand that people were invested in these battles, but they didn't understand how battles worked. So you could oftentimes, in that period, the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, people would stand at the corners. They stand on what they thought was the fringe of battle.
And watch.
And I was like, I had never heard that. How many casualties are there of people who were not battling, who were not,
That's never been...
Nobody talks about that. Exactly. Nobody ever says, oh, by the way, did you know that when people were in battle, and apparently it was a practice even into World War I.
But see, that would make sense, because if you think about like back in the Victorian era, like when they would bury their family, Sundays they'd go to church and they'd go out there with their picnic tables and sit with their dad and talk to them.
Right.
And play cards and read and just sit out there all day. So that would make sense that they'd be like, oh, let's go watch the battle.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, you see soldiers marching towards an area, and and in my mind, I'm like, I guess if I were living that time, I would absolutely be like, oh, they're going to fight. Oh, they're headed to, the battle. And to show up and be like, I wonder what it's going to be like. But again, you never hear that. But apparently, like in the during the Franco Wars, it's a huge problem where civilians just kind of showed up and sat out on the field because it was happening, in their backyard. It's like, who's not going to be looking out? Because I'm like, battle, get in a bunker, hide. But these were in people's backyards. These were people's farmlands.
I feel like I was a picnicker. I would have been a picnicker. I'd been like, what's going on?
What's going on?
Yeah. Well, I guess the moral of this episode is Chris would have died in a war from watching.
Easily.
So not from fighting, but from watching.
I'd be eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
I'd have been right there with you.
Yeah. We've just been sitting on a little, gingham blanket.
Absolutely. Well, Radar, thank you so much for coming back onto the show. I'm sure we'll have you again because we have so many things we can talk to you about and things like that. And if you guys have any specific questions that you would like to ask Radar at some point, you are more than welcome to send those over. Also, feel free to use...
We're about to do a Parajunkie.
Okay, well, we are going to do a short Parajunkie exclusive, actually, on astral projection, which Radar does very often. So we're going to do like a little bit of a deep dive into that, and that will be only on Patreon, so you do have to become a Parajunkie for that. So if you do want to do that, you can find us under the Savannah Underground on Patreon. And if you don't already follow us on social media, what are you doing? I tell you guys this every episode, but you can find us on TikTok under Haunted City Podcast, and then on Instagram under The Most Haunted City on Earth. You can get our merch on hauntedcitypodcast.com. But with that, y'all, my name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And stay spooky, y'all.